Hey guys, this is Will Roundtree, your FICO certified credit specialist, author of 2 books, Credit is King, as well as Full-Time CEO, the shit they don't tell you. But more importantly, I want to take you on this journey about financial literacy, the importance of credit, how to understand credit, and how to get to that money. Let's go. Yeah, so growing up in Milwaukee, very hard city to grow up in. I mean, we didn't have the heroes like a New York or a LA or even Atlanta. Both of my parents, middle class working Americans. Most people never even heard of Milwaukee. I was surrounded by gangs, D-boys, pimps, all of that. And so with that being said, I knew hard work, but I wanted the lifestyle that a lot of them had. And so as my parents kind of see me kind of gravitating towards, what potentially could happen, because as they say, you become a product of your environment. After my freshman year in high school, my parents actually moved me to Mississippi to live with my grandparents. And while living with my grandparents, which were my father's parents, because he was from Mississippi, my mom was from Milwaukee, was on 120 acres of farmland, working with my grandfather, where we did everything from bale hay to working in the garden, shucking corn, for those who are familiar with that term, working on top of roofs and all of this stuff. And I would do a lot of this even after school hours. So I would say that's kind of where I developed my work ethic. And so living with my grandparents in Kosciuszko, Mississippi, my grandfather, who was an entrepreneur, also my grandfather in Milwaukee was an entrepreneur. Both of them never even finished elementary school. So I was always around hardworking people. Even my dad was an aspiring entrepreneur. He never took the leap of faith. He always, kind of played it safe. And so once I graduated high school in 1997, the day of my graduation, moved back to Milwaukee, didn't know what I was going to do, had flirted with going to the military, decided to go to a technical college for computer engineering, quickly found out that that wasn't the path or route for me. I was a straight A, B student sometimes, but my thing was I wanted to make money. Well, one, I had no distractions. So it trained me psychologically to be able to work without dealing with distractions. Again, I'm 13 years old, and it's on this farm, it's only 3 homes. It's my grandfather, my aunt, and my uncle. And I had no choice but to work because I get bored easily. So I wanted to stay active. And I also knew if I helped him out, I could make a couple dollars to be able to, buy sneakers or whatever I wanted to buy, even though he didn't pay me much. But I never mind working. I always wanted to know. I was always intrigued with things. Like even thinking back to when I was in middle school living in Milwaukee, I would buy candy from the grocery stores and gas stations and sell it for a profit in school. So I always wanted to be able to make money. And so to answer that question, Mississippi, 1, taught me a work ethic, 2, taught me how to work without distraction, and 3, gave me a guidance on being able to work without instructions. Because my grandfather, he was the type was like, hey, go do this. And I had to be able to use my reason to figure out how to make it happen. And if I came to him with a problem, I better have a solution before I even bring the problem to him. So it also even taught me a level of critical thinking that I think most people are not taught. And that's a life skill that, I implement in my teachings when I'm working with clients. I graduated on May 25th, 1997. Went to my the graduation party, and literally 2 hours later, we were on the road, moved back to Milwaukee. Got to Milwaukee, didn't know what I wanted to do, thought about military, ended up going to Milwaukee Area Technical College for computer engineering. And so I was bored. Even when I was in high school, school was bored to me. I used to finish my work at lunch. So I never had to bring homework home, any of that. But I think the light bulb had went off for me again, because I was always fascinated with how money works, because nobody really ever taught us about money. And when I can remember being younger, I would always think about like, man, how am I going to take care of myself? how much will it cost for me to live by myself, and et cetera, et cetera. So I remember being in school, and I was in my economics class. And as we're going down, he was breaking down kind of like the average livable wage and all of these different things. And it didn't calculate to me. I'm like, okay, it's going to cost me X amount of dollars to complete a 4-year degree. I'm going to come out making X amount of dollars. I can go get a job and make this. And so I asked my teacher, will this path help me to become wealthy? And he said no. And so I never went back to school after that. And um, I was a little bit embarrassed because a lot of people, especially on my dad's side, were college educated. It actually made me feel a little bit self-conscious because everybody assumed I was going to go to school, be some, high level degree individual, but school was just boring to me. And I knew that there was a disconnect between wealth and college. And not saying that people who go to college can't become wealthy. I just knew statistically, most people who traveled that route didn't even work in the field that they went to school for. And so um, it's interesting because I wasn't around entrepreneurs. Like, it was nothing that really gave me that mindset. It was just something that went off in me. It could have been something I learned when I was younger, but I just remember mathematically it didn't make sense to me, make sense or sense. And
Uh,
so yeah, that's really, I would say, would be the light bulb. It didn't make sense or sense. Little insider about me is I actually used to cut hair when I was in high school. So I've always been around barbers, and how I made money when I moved to Vegas when I didn't really have gainful employment is I was a mobile barber. I actually put some ads on the internet, and I would go travel to people at the casinos and cut their hair. This was before it even became popular. Matter of fact, I think my ads are even still on the internet. But to answer your question, I knew the barbershop was always the mecca for us in our communities. Your barber was your psychiatrist. He probably was your doctor. He was your marriage counselor. And so I said, where better place to go and talk to the people about one of the few things that nobody else is talking about, or they're not relaying the proper information about it, is the barbershop. The women would also be there because they have young men who they are taking to the barbershop. So it's a good way to have a catch-all of being able to get all age ranges, men, women, teaching the barbers about credit and entrepreneurship and different things like that. Because I also care about that industry and space because I've worked around so many barbers. And so my whole premise for the 50 men was really to be able to get into the mecca of the community and teach these workshops. And I didn't care if one person was listening or the entire shop would listen. And once it started catching on, like, the barbers would literally stop cutting their clients' hair. The clients would be like, hey, can I listen to what he's talking about? And so excuse me, it just started to catch on. And so I decided to keep it going. And then I wanted to do something a little bit more formal with my cocktail and credit brand. And how that came about is that when it comes to talking about credit and money and different things like that, even entrepreneurship, people have their guard up because, unfortunately, in the Black community, is something we don't talk about. And so, but I know people like to have a good time, people like entertainment, people like networking events. So I said, you know what, let me create a concept with a networking event where I bring the information to them. So I created the cocktail and credit, where we go into a lounge. The first half of it is networking, people meeting each other, get an opportunity to have, just relax, have an adult beverage. And then for about 30 to 45 minutes, then I'm going to teach you about credit, real estate, entrepreneurship, business, taxes, all of that. And so it lacks the atmosphere, excuse me, for people to be able to digest that information. And so it took off, it worked. And so I actually trademarked both of those concepts, the names and all of that. And it's something that's really been my passion for a while now. So I wrote Credit is King in 2016. And how that actually happened was I have a good friend of mine who has a publishing company. He asked me, hey, why don't you write a book? Didn't know what to write about. He said, just write about what you know, write it about credit. And I was like, I don't want to write a credit book. It's a million of those. I don't want to do a how to. But then as I sat and thought about it, I was like, you know what, let me just write it from my point of view. So I wanted to make it more like a manual. And so, and I wanted to make it to where an eighth grader could read it. And the reason why is because most people comprehend on the eighth grade level. And I didn't want to make it so complicated for people to get it and understand it, because a lot of these financial books are just intimidating to read. So I wrote Credit is King, really had no expectation of it. The book literally started flying off the shelves. At one point became a top bestseller. To this day, I'm still amazed at how well that book sells globally, not even just here in the States. And so about 3 years later, decided, you know, I want to write another book. Everybody kept asking me to do a second edition of Credit is King, but I really wanted to write about entrepreneurship, because that's really where my path is at, is teaching people about entrepreneurship. But I didn't want to talk about the superficial side, like, hey, you can become wealthy, just follow these three principles. I want people to know, yo, this shit is hard. You know, you could lose everything, but you got to have a different mindset. Let me talk to you about budgeting. Let me talk to you about pricing, competition, formulas for success. I actually have it right here because I do a class on it. So I wanted to talk about things that no one else was talking about. And so that's actually how those two books came to fruition. My drop of a dream, how that really came about was when I moved to Las Vegas, and I often share this story, I had nowhere to live pretty much. And I can remember I was living in a weekly, which is kind of like a ran down motel where you pay by the week. I didn't have a bed. I didn't have furniture. I didn't have television. I grocery shopped at the 99-cent store. I can remember I would donate blood. I would go do power washing jobs to make money. And I can remember every single night coming home, I would sleep on the floor on top of bath towels. There were roaches running around. And for lunch and dinner, I ate Captain Crunch and Top Ramen. And I told myself, I cannot live like this the rest of my life. There is something that other people know that I do not know. And so that really was that light bulb, and kind of that drop that drove me, was my conditions. And believe it or not, and I don't want to sound corny, and I used to always tell myself, I owe this to my ancestors. They worked too hard for me to stay in these type of conditions. They sacrificed their lives so that we could create an opportunity for ourselves. And so I just had to go out there and put the work in. And I didn't care if it took me 3 years, 10 years, 30 years, because I had to work over the next 30, 40 years anyway. And so that's it was always that drive. And what that looks like for me now is that, it's not about the money for me, because, I do fairly well, but now it's about that legacy piece. I know a lot of people talk legacy, but I really want to be able to leave a mark with my philosophy behind. I want to leave a mark with, my information. I want to be able to really like, I read something a long time ago, and it said that most of us, we don't know who our great 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 grandparents are. And the reason that is because they didn't leave us anything. But the Hiltons know who their great great grandparents are, the Marriotts, the Hunts family, or whatever major corporation. I want my great great grandchildren to know who Will Roundtree was. And so that's what drives me, is really creating and leaving a legacy. And again, it's so much bigger than the money. Although I know money helps to lubricate life and afford you options, it decides the school zone your kids go to school in. But my thing is really that legacy, and that's what drives me.